He always believed Islam was nothing more than a strict set of rules. That's what he saw growing up. Muslims praying at fixed times, fasting for long hours, avoiding things that everyone else called fun. It looked like a life full of restrictions, a system that took away freedom, joy, and individuality. In his mind, Islam wasn't spiritual, it was legalistic, not a faith but a manual. And so he never looked any deeper. He judged it from a distance, and like many, he assumed he understood enough to reject it. Whenever someone mentioned Islam, he would respond with the same lines: too many rules, it's not for me. I want to live freely. He believed freedom meant doing what you want, when you want, how you want. He believed joy came from the absence of limits, and he believed Muslims lived in fear, not in faith. But beneath all that confidence was a restlessness he didn't talk about. The nights he couldn't sleep, the moments of anxiety he couldn't explain. The feeling that, despite doing everything free, he still felt empty. Then one afternoon, everything changed. Quietly, unexpected. He was sitting alone on a park bench, phone in hand, mind buzzing with distractions. An old man sat beside him. His beard was white, his clothes were simple, and his eyes held something unusual: contentment. They exchanged polite greetings, then slowly began talking. Nothing deep, just life, family, the world. But what struck him was the old man's smile. It wasn't just kind, it was peaceful, unbothered. As they talked more, the young man learned he was a Muslim. Not a preacher, not a debater, just a regular man who had been through life's storms, but still smiled like nothing could shake him. "How do you stay so calm?" he finally asked. The old man chuckled gently. "Because I know who's in control." That one sentence hit harder than 1,000 lectures. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't loud, it was real. It came from a place of trust and surrender that the young man had never known. Suddenly, Islam didn't seem like rules anymore. It looked like guidance, like a path, like something that didn't chain the soul, but anchored it. He began to reflect on everything he had misunderstood. Maybe the prayers weren't just rituals, they were reminders. Maybe the fasts weren't torture, they were training. Maybe the rules weren't walls, they were doors. Doors to a deeper connection with the one who created him. And maybe that old man's smile was proof. Proof that a life lived close to Allah doesn't need to be loud, doesn't need to be defended. It just shines. That moment didn't end with a dramatic conversion, but it planted a seed of curiosity, a crack in the wall of assumptions. And sometimes, that's how hearts begin to change. Not through arguments, but through sincerity. Not through preaching, but through presence. Not through big gestures, but through small, meaningful encounters. And all it took was one old man's smile. He had grown up believing that religion was a box, a limiting system of rules and commands meant to control people's lives. Islam to him seemed like the most rigid of them all. 5 daily prayers, long fasts, strict dress codes, endless do this and don't do that. It looked like a life of routine, with no space for freedom, self-expression, or joy. So he chose a life that was the complete opposite. He lived how he wanted, followed his own rules, and dismissed anyone who followed religion as being stuck in the past. Every time he passed by a masjid, he'd shake his head. Every time he saw Muslims praying in public, he'd roll his eyes. He believed they were just brainwashed into obeying something they didn't even understand. In his heart, he felt sorry for them, thinking they were missing out on real life. And yet, deep inside, something didn't feel complete. His freedom often led to emptiness. His happiness often faded into confusion. The life he thought would satisfy him never really filled the space inside. One day, while sitting at a park lost in his thoughts, he noticed an elderly man walk by and sit on the bench next to him. The man had a peaceful face, slow movements, and a gentle smile. The two exchanged a simple salam, and a conversation began. It wasn't deep at first, just casual talk about the weather, how fast the world was changing, and the beauty of slowing down. But the more they spoke, the more he noticed something unique in the old man. Peace. Not just the absence of stress, but a deep-rooted stillness. He asked him, "What keeps you so calm? You don't seem worried about anything." The old man smiled again and said, "Because I don't carry everything. I hand it over to Allah." That sentence froze him. He had never thought about life like that. All his worries, all his pressure, all his stress, he had been carrying it alone. And here was a man who looked lighter, not because life was easier, but because his heart was anchored in faith. That one smile and one sentence shattered everything he assumed about Islam. Maybe Islam wasn't rules. Maybe it was relief. After that unexpected moment in the park, something inside him began to shift. That one sentence, "I hand it over to Allah," kept echoing in his mind. It wasn't just the words, it was how they were said. So calm, so sincere, so real. He couldn't stop thinking about the old man's smile. It wasn't a fake smile, it wasn't hiding pain. It was a reflection of someone who had truly found peace in a world that rarely gives it. And for the first time, he began to wonder, what if Islam wasn't what he thought it was? That night, he opened YouTube and searched, "Why Muslims Smile in Hardship." He wasn't ready to read the Quran or attend a masjid, but he wanted to understand what that old man had. He found stories, so many of them. Stories of Muslims who lost loved ones but still found strength in prayer. People who lived through war, poverty, illness, but still carried contentment in their hearts. What was the secret? Over and over again, he saw one common thread: trust in Allah. Not fear, not robotic obedience, but love, surrender, and peace through submission. He had always thought that following rules meant losing freedom, but now he was realizing the opposite. Freedom without purpose was just chaos. Without boundaries, he had no direction. Without meaning, his freedom only led him to deeper confusion. Islam, as he was slowly starting to see, didn't enslave people, it freed them from fear, from ego, from pressure, from carrying the world alone. The more he thought about the old man, the more he realized that smile came from somewhere deeper than just personality. It came from faith, from knowing that no matter what happens, you are not alone. You are not in control, and that's okay, because Allah is. He began to see that maybe the prayers weren't about rules, they were about remembering. Maybe fasting wasn't about restriction, it was about reflection. And maybe Islam wasn't just a religion, it was a path to live with meaning. And all of that began not with a lecture or a book. It began with one old man's peaceful smile, a smile that said, "I have Allah, and that's enough." He started to recall every moment in his life where he felt lost, but didn't know where to turn. The nights he stared at the ceiling, wondering what the point of it all was. The times he chased success, relationships, and entertainment, only to feel empty again after the high faded. He realized he had always been searching for something, but he couldn't name it. He thought maybe it was just a better job, a new place, or someone who would finally understand him. He couldn't name it, but nothing ever truly satisfied his soul. Now he began to see things differently. That old man, with his soft voice and peaceful eyes, had something far more valuable than anything the world could give. He had a calm heart, a heart that wasn't shaken by the world's noise, a heart that didn't depend on people, wealth, or control. That kind of peace didn't come from following rules. It came from following truth. So he started reading, quietly, privately, not to become Muslim, not yet, but to understand what made this religion feel so grounded. He read stories from the Prophet Muhammad's life, the mercy he showed even to those who hurt him, the patience he held in times of loss, the gratitude he lived with, even when he had very little. These stories didn't sound like rules, they sounded like light, like a way of living that lifted the heart instead of burdening it. He realized Islam wasn't a checklist, it was a lifestyle that brought harmony to the soul. A system not to control people, but to connect them with their Creator. Suddenly, the 5 daily prayers didn't look like interruptions. They looked like moments to pause and recharge. The fasting didn't seem harsh. It looked like training for the soul. The prohibitions weren't punishments, they were protections. He began to feel jealous of that old man's peace, but not in a bitter way, in a way that inspired him. That smile was proof that you could live simply and still be fulfilled, that you could age and still feel light, that you could face life's trials without fear if your heart was held by Allah. And for the first time, he whispered a prayer he never thought he'd say. God, if this is real, guide me to it. In the days that followed, his heart kept returning to that single moment, the old man's smile. It haunted him in the best way possible. Every time he felt overwhelmed, anxious, or lost, that smile would flash in his mind. Not because it was extraordinary in appearance, but because it carried something he had never seen before: true contentment. It wasn't the smile of someone who had everything. It was the smile of someone who had enough, and what he had was awe. He started to notice other Muslims around him in a new light. He observed how they spoke with purpose, how they made time for prayer even in the middle of busy workdays, how they lowered their gaze, how they gave to charity without needing recognition. It all seemed small on the surface, but together, it painted a picture of inner discipline and quiet strength. He had misunderstood Islam for so long, seeing it as just outward behavior. Now he was beginning to see that the outward acts were only reflections of a deeper inner state. What changed him most was realizing that Islam wasn't just about obeying commands, it was about building a relationship with the one who created him, who knew his fears, his mistakes, and his pain, and still offered him a path to peace. The rules weren't there to control him, they were there to lead him gently back to himself, back to the fitra, the natural purity he was born with, but had lost under layers of doubt and distraction. He thought back to the old man's words, "I hand it over to Allah." That wasn't just a sentence, it was a lifestyle. And he began to crave that lifestyle more than anything else. Not for show, not for status, but because he was tired. Tired of carrying everything alone, tired of pretending to be strong while feeling empty, tired of looking for meaning in places that only offered noise. He hadn't taken Shahada yet, but now he prayed quietly at night, with words that were clumsy but real. He still had questions, still had fears, but his heart was softening, and all because one old man didn't argue. He just smiled, and that smile told him, Islam isn't just rules. It's a way to finally breathe. He began to realize that the strength he had always admired wasn't in loud voices or big achievements. It was in stillness. That old man, who had simply smiled and spoken gently about his faith, carried a kind of strength that couldn't be faked. It wasn't in his words alone, but in how he moved, how he listened, how he carried himself with a kind of humility that felt more powerful than pride. And slowly the young man began to understand true strength comes from knowing where you stand with your Creator. And that's what Islam gave him. He used to think religion was for people who were weak or afraid of the unknown. But now he could see how wrong he'd been. The more he studied the teachings of Islam, the life of the Prophet Muhammad, the meaning behind prayer, the purpose behind discipline, the more he realized this was not a faith of fear. It was a faith of clarity, of calm, of balance. It didn't teach people to escape the world. It taught them how to walk through it without being broken by it. He started to apply small things in his life, waking up with gratitude, lowering his gaze, trying to speak less and listen more. He even fasted one day, not to prove anything to anyone, but to feel what Muslims felt. And for the first time, he felt deeply connected, not just to a belief system, but to something far greater than himself. There was a simplicity in it all, yet within that simplicity was a depth he had never experienced before. One day, he returned to that same park, hoping he'd see the old man again. And to his surprise, there he was, sitting under the same tree, reading Quran. He walked over, sat beside him, and smiled. The old man looked at him and smiled back, with the same peaceful warmth that had started this journey. This time, the young man didn't come with questions. He came with understanding. He said, "You probably didn't know this, but your smile changed something in me." The old man simply said, "That smile is from Islam. You're welcome to it too." And at that moment, he knew Islam wasn't just rules. It was a light, a calm, a return home. Weeks passed, and his heart continued to soften in silence. He wasn't rushing into anything, but every day felt like a step closer to something real. The more he read the Quran, the more he felt like it was speaking directly to him, not with complicated arguments or commands, but with a voice that reached deep into the soul. Verses about the heart, about patience, about purpose and peace. They weren't just poetic, they were healing. They felt like answers to questions he never said out loud. He remembered